I'm doing my best in the videos to try to make it clear we need to go to the genesis, we need to go to the beginning to understand where things are. The audience that generally I'm speaking to are still caught up somewhere way down the line. They're caught up in the confusion. They're caught up in a jurisdictional regime that they've entered. Unfortunately, they don't realize they entered by consent. They won't admit to that. There's many putting, many things convoluted into their actions right now without prejudice, acting as if they never really have a say on it. That they're staying in a way neutral to it while they're using something that's still designated in the system that makes them liable. But what we're trying to do in these videos is get people back to their origin, and then you don't end up in the confusion. And that's what I'm trying to slowly do. I find this is probably one of the most difficult things for me to speak because of the surrounding amount of people in confusion. And I'm not trying to shock them with ice cold water. I want them to slowly start to peel off that confusion and see it in truth. And so when we look at the statement of birth record, this is no different than the book of Genesis. And in Genesis, of course, we know that God created man in his image. But this is a legal document, so it's trying to do a recreation. So Satan is trying to recreate his jurisdiction through entertainment, pretending. You can't run legal tender without a pretender to associate with that legal tender that doesn't really exist. So in the pretend world, they have to create basically a pretend name, a fictional name, a lie. That's why Satan's called the father of the lie. So when you eat from something that's fictional or a lie, you will surely die. As it's stated in Scripture, that the day that Adam ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we'll call it truth and fiction, good versus evil, you will surely die. So therefore he had a choice. God doesn't make robots. He gives them free will. It is his free will. If you stay in harmony with God and choose what is right and refrain from what is wrong, you still have a choice. You elect to either right or wrong. So unfortunately, as happened in the Garden of Eden, it's happening again in Satan's legal world, his kingdoms. He's giving a choice. Now at the beginning, of course, the child has nothing to do with this, but it's certainly going to imprint on that child as time goes on, because if the parents are following eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, so will the children, as it was in the days of the flood. The people who did not go to the salvation of God ended up dead in the judgment that happened at that time of that world. So we have to look at that there is a choice between good and evil. So when you choose the evil side, they issue a judgment against you. You now are dead according to God. You no longer have what is natural and pure and spiritual. You're now in the world of the dead. And that's why they always summons the dead to the court. And that's why the version of this name that occurs, and I'll draw it out very simply. I'm going to use Smith because it's biblical. It shows up in there in Scripture. But it's always Smith, comma, say John. But that's the name that generally you show up in. And that was the civil process of keeping track of the dead. The lists of the dead were that way. So even in the civil world, Satan says if you touch what's his, okay, you're basically going to pay. He didn't give you freedom. He gave you none of the such. He gave you actually debt, torment, torture, burden, all the things that go with hell in his world, having a misplaced trust. You were burned. So what we are in right now, if you are a participant and you're carrying this, which is what people use to vote, they have to come up with something. This is the basic document. You'll come in to vote on the voters list. Look at your voter registration. It will show up with your name in reverse because it has to place something in reverse, something in first place. Because in the world of legal, everything's upside down. So they place something of man's positive law in forefront, in first place, over what you would have naturally and spiritually, because you've given that up. You've joined a society that says the natural and spiritual and truth is gone down the toilet. It's in the chamber with the judge, in the chambers, in the crapper. And so now you're nothing more than fertilizer that's going to the ground. And so they summons you to appear because you were silly enough to consent to this. Yes, I admit deceived. Satan hasn't changed his game plan, but this is what's going on. So if you're carrying one of these, this is truly a denial of the salvation of Jesus Christ, because this represents duty, debt, and obligation to a legal system, not to a spiritual one. Therefore, can you be spiritual and legal at the same time? No.